Hey guys, Alec Torelli here. Welcome back to an episode of the Hand of the Day.
Hand of the Day.
Today's hand I'm bringing to you from the beautiful Alpine Palace in South Tyrol in Italy. Epic ski resort, highly recommend it if you come to the Italy-Austria border. Definitely check this place out. Today's hand comes from one of my readers. He's playing 1-2-4 at Ballys in Atlantic City. Finds himself in a really interesting spot in this hand. He opens in the cutoff to 16 with pocket threes, totally standard, and the small blind calls. These two players go heads up to the flop. The flop comes down ace of clubs, jack of clubs, 7 of diamonds. The villain checks in the small blind. Hero goes for a $25 c-bet in this spot. Now this is a spot where I think that the hero could just opt to check back here. We don't really get any better hands to fold, and even if our opponent has a worse hand that can float the flop with, like a hand that we are trying to get value from or protect against a draw, something like a club draw, something like 8-9, even if he floats with that, or king 10 or king queen, specifically any club draw like 6-5 of clubs or whatever, we still don't win the pot against those hands. It's important to understand that if we're only going to bet one time in this spot, we don't win the pot against those hands, because what happens later in the hand? The turn goes check check, and now our opponent's going to bluff the river. We're going to fold our threes, and we're not going to win the pot regardless. So I would probably rather see a check back on this flop, and then just try and win at showdown against our opponent's hands, like something like if he has king high or something, he's just going to check it. We're going to go to the river. We're going to try and win this pot at showdown. We do let our opponent catch up, but you have to sort of weigh that against the times that you're trying to get value from your hand, which you don't really do with this hand. I'd like to see a hand as a c-bet with something that we could effectively double barrel with, something like 8-9 of diamonds, where we could bet a lot of turns, we could bluff it with a lot of cards, something that has no showdown value, but that we could potentially bluff with on different turns that give us more equity. Maybe even something as weak as 6-5 of diamonds we could throw in as a bluffing bet. Threes, I mean, it could go either way. It's not like a terrible c-bet here on the flop. I'm just presenting a different option that I would do some of the time with this particular hand. As played, we opt to bet 25. Our opponent calls. Now let's go and take a turn. Turn comes a deuce of spades. Our opponent checks, and we go for a $55 bet here again. Now, if we're gonna bet with something like threes on the flop and we get called, we sort of have to have a game plan in mind. I think if we're gonna just bet and then our opponent calls and then we just check to the river, it's probably better just to end up checking the flop. If we're going to say, you know what, I don't think my opponent has a lot of really premium hands in his range on this particular board, and he's gonna fold if I bet 3 times, and we're sort of setting that play up on the flop by c-betting, then I think betting has a little bit more merit. And it seems like that's what our hero here in this hand is trying to do. He says, you know what, our opponent just called in the small blind. He didn't 3-bet his pre-flop. He can't have aces. He can't have 3 aces. He probably can't have 3 jacks. It's unlikely he has ace jack or a set because he would have check raised the flop. You know what? I'm just gonna bet 3 times and really put him to a tough spot and make him make a big call with like an ace-x type of hand, or make him have a big hero call in this spot. So I'm okay with betting the turn here again. If I'm going to bet here and really turn my hand into a bluff, I'm probably gonna bet a little bit bigger. I mean, you're giving your opponent a great price to call here when you bet 55. It's a little bit too small. I think I would go, you know, 25 on the flop is fine, but then I'd probably go like 90 or 100 on the turn and then setting it up for 300 or something on the river like that. If you really want to get your opponent to fold, you want to set it up on the turn so that he sees that you're going to be applying max pressure and really leveraging your position as much as possible in this hand. Anyway, as played, you bet 55. Our opponent now calls, and we go to the river where things get interesting. River comes to 7 of hearts, so all the draws miss, and our opponent now bets out 150. And you mentioned a live read here where he kind of seemed unsure about what to do on the river before deciding to bet, which I think plays a big factor into the types of hands that he could have here. So, taking the live read into account, I think that makes him look a little bit weaker. That was your read, that's my read based on your read as well. So it makes a little bit of sense here that you kind of skew his hands towards bluffs. Now, the one thing I would think about here is what level is my opponent on? Is he really capable of making a bluff here in this spot when it looks so obvious that he's bluffing? I mean, this is a spot where it's so obvious that our opponent is bluffing almost, because what hands could he possibly be value betting is sort of the question, that it seems like impossible that he would be bluffing. So I would really ask myself, what level is my opponent on here? Is he really just going to make a bluff in this spot? Is he not really aware of how it looks when he bets this river, that he's not really repping anything, that if he had a 7, he would check raise this river? If he had a stronger hand than a 7, he would have check raised the flop or the turn. It looked so bluffy that I would rely on my opponent being on a rudimentary level in order to make this call. So I also think when you add that up with the live read and the stakes you're playing and the game you're playing, it feels like all these things are, you know, converging to say that our opponent is just making a silly bluff here, and he missed his draw. Now he's trying to like rep some type of hand, and now he's betting. So I think in this spot, your opponent's hand looks like a 7, which he could have a 7. He's not always going to check raise the 7 on the river. He could have like 7x of clubs, right? That's definitely possible. Or he just missed a draw. And when you add up those two combos, I think there's enough misdraw types of hands that you could justify calling here. It's important to realize that yes, you have 3s, and yes, your hand is like really, really bad. But when you weigh your hand against the specific hands that your opponent has, it's really like your opponent has a nuts or nothing type of situation. He's either hit a monster on the river and he's betting, in my opinion, or he just missed a draw. I don't think he's ever gonna bet this river with like an ace. Like he's not gonna have like ace-5 suited and just bet this river. He's probably not gonna bet this river with like ace-king. That might be a play he would do with ace-king. It's like possible. Some players could have ace-king and play it this way. But I think most of the time when people take, you know, a passive line pre-flop with a big hand like ace-king, ace-queen, or maybe even ace-jack, and then check call, when the board pairs on the river and the draw missed, they're not just gonna come out firing. They're probably gonna let you continue betting, maybe bluff your draw, or play pot control. So it doesn't really make sense that he's merging his range here and betting some type of hand that's in between. What makes sense to me is he either missed a draw completely and he's on absolute airball, or he's betting a 7, which doesn't really make that much sense because I think you should probably be check raising a 7 here on the river. So it feels like a misdraw to me. That's what it feels like. And when you add up all the variables about your read and everything, it just feels like a misdraw. So I don't mind the hero's play here, which the hero ends up calling in this spot, which I actually don't mind. I think that there's some questionable plays the hero made on, you know, maybe the flop, maybe double barreling the turn is a little bit too loose, especially with the sizing here. You're just getting called too often. Your opponent maybe is not going to fold the turn often enough. Those things are debatable. But on the river, I actually really like the call, and I want to give hats off to the hand reading ability here, because I think he really put it all together and figured out, you know what, this guy's bluffing me. This makes no sense here, and he ended up calling. He was also right. The opponent tables king queen of clubs for a misdraw, and I think that also helps confirm that we got the right read, and hats off to the hero here. Very well done, and great call. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on this hand. I know there's some interesting spots here that come up, you know, on the flop, on the turn, on the river. How would you guys have played it? Do you like the river call? What do you think about the double barrel here? Is it too loose going for barreling twice, or is it a play that could be effective in this spot? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like this video. Click that subscribe button up here. If you like this, you want more content from me, I'm putting out new hand of the day content every week. So I'll see you guys back here very soon, and thank you guys again for watching. Cheers.